So actually, if we regard our highways as critical lifelines, investing more in them, understanding where the particular threats might be to an extreme weather event, and then ensuring that they're well maintained, I think it's really important that we plan nationally for this, because we've got parts of the country that are isolated, and we know that, for instance, if after 3 days, and there was a Twitter photo from Franz Joseph yesterday showing the emptying out bread aisles of the superette. After 3 days, supermarkets shelves can start to be a little bare, and that's what we're dealing with. And it's important that we plan for this across where the risk is, but also over the long term, and really understand where we need to up our infrastructure investment.
NZ Road Transport Forum Chief Executive Nick Leggett. And just an update here, Ministry of Health spokesperson Pete Watson says of the 31 people who are injured, 25 are in burns units in Christchurch, Hutt Valley, Waikato and Middlemore hospitals. 6 patients have been transferred to Tauranga and Auckland to be treated, and will be transferred to the 4 regional burns units as soon as there is capacity. And Mr Watson says all of the burns units are currently at capacity. So we'll be having the latest updates throughout Checkpoint and into the evening here on RNZ National. Coming back to this, a quick thought on this. I mean, they want bigger money into roading upgrades.
Well, the key word, I think, was planning or lack of it. So what's happened is the last couple of years, climate change, the weather has caused the landslides, the bridges to fail, etc., and the disruption. So actually paying to fix up the disruptions is not investment into making it better. But Phil Twyford said that it's the cost of extreme weather has gone from 26 million to 72 million, but they've increased the state highway budget by more than 200 million.
Yeah, we have to get the equilibrium right. It's about infrastructure, it's about roads, it's about railways, it's about culverts. And actually, if you go up north, a town like Kaio, and which means the rest of the top of the North Island, it often gets shut off, and the weather isn't actually particularly extreme. So, we have pockets in New Zealand where
regularly shut off.
Where they're regularly shut off, and our infrastructure is poor, and we do need to improve.
We just got to think about it at the right time, which is not when, there's been torrential rain and everything's shut off and it's, oh gosh, there was only one road.
You can hardly blame the government, can you not, for these sorts of weather events which are going to be happening a lot more.
No, well, you can't blame the government, but you can expect a level of forward thinking. I mean, I live out in Karaka. There are millions, no, not quite, but there are a whole lot of new houses being built and no roads.
And now is the time.
Roads.
Now is the time to get our infrastructure right. Money is cheap. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's do it now.
We have to invest now in our key utilities.
Another update here, 27 people had suffered greater than 30% burns over their body. So we will keep you up to date on the latest on Whakaari White Island throughout Checkpoint and into the evening here on RNZ National. A lot of response here. Someone says, Jenny Bornholt, the best poet in the country. Forget these dead white men. So there you have it. Shane Te Pau and Cindy Mitchell, thank you very much for being on the show.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thank you for having us, Wallace. Nice
Checkpoint
to meet
next.
you, Shane.
I'm back with you tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Hariaki nei, a criminal investigation is launched in the aftermath of the White Island eruption. 5 people are confirmed dead, 8 are still missing, among them 2 local tour guides. Anxious families wait for news, with the volcano still too volatile for a recovery mission. An attempt to launch a drone above the island has failed today. The police will try again this evening. A veteran paramedic says the island was like a scene out of Chernobyl, the hospital a war zone, according to one senior doctor. We have the ordinary people who did extraordinary things in the face of extreme danger.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. The police have begun a criminal investigation into the circumstances of the deadly eruption on Whakaari White Island, which killed 13 people. The National Operation Commander Deputy Commissioner John Timms has just announced the inquiry at a media conference. There is still no word on exactly when the police will send teams in to recover bodies of those still on the island. Mr Timms says everyone who could be taken from the island yesterday was rescued.
A number of flights were carried out throughout the day and no signs of life were seen. Today we are working with Defence and FENS to determine the conditions on the island, including gas levels in the atmosphere. This will be done by a drone able to carry specialised measuring equipment. This requires a boat getting into within 1 kilometre of the island in order to launch the drones. We are hoping to do this today.
Civil Defence's Emergency Management Director Sarah Stewart-Black says there is a 50% chance of eruption in the next 24 hours. GNS says while the chances of a large eruption are low, the volcanic alert level remains at 3. 8 people are missing, presumed dead, while another 5 taken off the island after the eruption yesterday afternoon also died. 31 people remain in hospitals around the country, some with critical burns, while 3 have been discharged. A friend of one of those still missing, 23-year-old man Tipene Maangi, says she wishes she was in his place. Mr Maangi was hired to work as a guide for White Island tours earlier this year. His close friend Shania Simmons applied for the same job and says she now wishes she got it instead.
In all honesty, all I could think this morning was I would have rather it be me than him out there. But I think he'd be saying something along the lines of, I was on White Island when it blew up. He's that kind of person, like, he'd find it funny.
Shania Simmons speaking about her friend Tipene Maangi. A tour guide has been called a hero for dragging more than 20 people off Whakaari in suffocating conditions. White Island tour manager Paul Kingi has just left the island with his tour group when the volcano erupted. Mr Kingi recounted the experience to his friend and former employer, Rick Pollock, who spoke to RNZ.
As soon as the eruption went off, they turned around immediately to see if they could render help, and Paul got back in one of the inflatables where they transfer their passengers to and from the island, and he got back on the island, and he just charged up into that crater and was just pulling people off left, right, and center. I think he pulled in excess of 20 people out.
The Prime Minister has sent a message to the families and friends of those overseas tourists caught up in the eruption that New Zealand will hold their loved ones close. Jacinda Ardern told MPs in Parliament during a ministerial statement that among those injured or missing are people from Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, China, Germany, Malaysia and New Zealand.
I say to those who have lost and grieve, you are forever linked to our nation and we will hold you close.
A professor of geosciences at Australia's Monash University says Whakaari White Island has been a disaster waiting to happen for many years and it's always been too dangerous for daily tour groups to visit. Emeritus Professor Ray Cass is internationally known in the field of physical volcanology, including the hazards posed by volcanic eruptions. He says the first time he visited the island, he was in disbelief that tour groups were allowed there.
Given that there's no emergency services on the island, and that the means of actually reaching and leaving the island by rubber ducky is very limited, it makes it very difficult to escape. There's nowhere to escape to when an incident happens.
Professor Ray Cass says it is well known how volatile the island is and how quickly things can change on it. A kaumātua says locally we are rallying around the families of the victims who are mourning. About 200 people gathered today at Te Manuka Tūtahi Marae for karakia and an update from police on the rescue operation. Families of staff of the iwi-owned White Island Tours and some family of victims from overseas were also there. Kaumātua Te Kei Merito says it's a time to share with each other.
Those who suffered as a result of loss of family, they're still mourning, and you have to appreciate that. And so there weren't very many questions. In essence, the value of gathering today was to embrace each other and show love for each other.
The police have released details of the nationalities of the people on the island when it erupted. 2 were from the UK, 4 from Germany. There were 24 Australians and 5 New Zealanders. 2 tourists were from China, 1 from Malaysia and 9 were from the United States. Ministry of Health spokesperson Pete Watson says of the 31 people who are injured, 25 are in burns units in Christchurch, Hutt Valley, Waikato and Middlemore hospitals. 6 patients have been transferred to Tauranga and Auckland to be treated and will be transferred to the 4 regional burns units as soon as there is capacity. Mr Watson says all of the burns units are currently at capacity. 27 people suffered greater than 30% burns over their body. It's coming up to 5:05. The Australian batsman Steve Smith sees plenty of similarities between himself and Black Caps skipper Kane Williamson as the two sides prepare for the Test series starting in Perth on Thursday. Smith is ranked second on the Test batting rankings behind India's Virat Kohli, while Williamson is third. New Zealand haven't won a Test series in Australia since 1985, but Smith says the world number 2 ranked team represent a huge challenge, particularly with Williamson at the helm.
I think we actually hold the bat reasonably similarly. He's got quite a closed grip. I think it just helps playing the ball a little bit later. I think he plays it later than anyone else in the world. Terrific work ethic, good eye, and plenty of time, loads of time against quick bowling. So quality player, and hopefully we can keep him quiet this series.
Steve Smith. Former All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says the loss to England in the Rugby World Cup semi-final was a perfect storm. Hansen has told All Blacks TV he's reflected a lot on the build-up to that game.
We'd already won 2 World Cups in a row. What we're trying to do had never been done before, and with success comes a little less desperation, a bit of a perfect storm really. Then of course we played England, who were waiting for two and a half years to play this one game, and very, very desperate.
Steve Hansen. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow has grounds to appeal a decision by WADA to bar Russia from the major sporting events. Russia's been banned for 4 years for tampering with doping tests. That's the news.
Fakari White Island erupts.
To those who have lost or are missing family and friends, we share in your unfathomable grief at this moment in time and in your sorrow.
Just so sad to see him go, but it's also sad we don't know how many have gone, and as we said, I'm gripping onto the 5 and I don't want it to go any higher, but I think we all know it's going to go higher.
Yeah, a bit surreal to kind of realise that some of those people who went out yesterday aren't coming back. A very tight-knit community that's shocked by what's happened here.
Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mostly fine but isolated showers until tonight, mainly in Northland. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine breaks, cloud increasing tomorrow morning, occasional rain developing in Gisborne, becoming more persistent and spreading south. For the remainder of the North Island, also Nelson and Marlborough fine, chance of a shower about Marlborough Ranges tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland, Canterbury and North Otago fine and cloudy periods, isolated showers in Westland tonight. A few showers tomorrow afternoon and evening, mainly inland south of Tekapō, where some may be heavy. For the remainder of Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional showers turning to rain about Fiordland and Stewart Island tonight. Elsewhere, showers more frequent and possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon and evening. Chatham Islands fine, rain developing by tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's just coming up to 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Police have announced they will carry out a criminal investigation into the deaths of at least 5 people from the Fakari White Island eruption. There were 47 people on the island when it erupted just after 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. They were being hosted by White Island Tours. Many were tourists from a visiting cruise ship and had been on a day trip to the island. 5 people have been confirmed dead. Another 8 are still on the island but are not expected to be alive. Rescue crews still haven't been able to recover their bodies because conditions on Fakari White Island are deemed to be unsafe. Along with the deaths, there are dozens of injuries. 31 people were rushed to hospital yesterday, many of whom suffered significant burns. Those victims are aged 13 to 72, and 27 of them have burns to more than 30% of their body. The Ministry of Health says burns units in the country are now at capacity. In the past hour, police have announced they will be investigating the deaths and injuries from yesterday's eruption, and WorkSafe will also be investigating. Royal Caribbean says its cruise ship, Ovation of the Seas, will remain in port due to police operational matters. In a joint press conference that finished just a short time ago, Civil Defence Emergency Management Director Sarah Stewart-Black said that MFAT has sent 3 staff to Whakatane to support affected families.
In terms of conditions on the island, in regards to the conditions on Whakaari, White Island, monitoring equipment on the island is still functional and providing near real-time data. GNS Science will continue to closely monitor the situation on Whakaari, White Island. The web cameras indicate gas and steam jetting from the active vent area. While we've seen a steady decline in the seismic activity, there remains significant uncertainty about any future activity. GNS estimate that there is a 50% chance of a smaller or similar sized eruption over the next 24 hours, and that means a 50% chance of no eruption.
Ms Stewart-Black says the environment remained highly volatile and the alert level remained at a 3. Deputy Commissioner John Timms told media everyone who could have been rescued alive yesterday was taken off the island.
Today we are working with Defence and FENS to determine the conditions on the island, including gas levels in the atmosphere. This will be done by a drone able to carry specialised measuring equipment. This requires a boat getting into within 1 kilometre of the island in order to launch the drones. We are hoping to do this today. Unfortunately, we have had one attempt. The conditions have been against us and it's been too windy. We will continue to do so today if weather permits. We are taking advice from the best scientific experts, including GNS Science, who are considering 3 aspects of the recovery operation. Firstly, the condition of the island. Secondly, the requirements for those going onto the island, what they will need. And thirdly, the care and transportation of the deceased when they are recovered. We understand the desire from the locals and the loved ones to remove their family from the island. But we are working around the clock, we are working hard, and we understand what we need to do for friends and family. It has been released today, the nationalities of the 47 people on the island at the time of the eruption, living and deceased. 2 people from the United Kingdom, 4 people from Germany, 24 people from Australia, 5 people from New Zealand, 2 people from China, 1 person from Malaysia, and 9 people from the United States of America. I cannot break down those numbers any further until we have completed the DVI process. And so we will carry on working through that process until I can give you further information. I can confirm that there have been 5 fatalities. The 5 deceased have been transported to Auckland, where a post-mortem will be carried out. There are approximately 8 people missing and presumed deceased. When it comes to the investigation, I can confirm now that we will commence a criminal investigation into the circumstances of the death and injuries on White Island. The terms of reference will be developed over the next few days. This will be carried out in parallel with the WorkSafe New Zealand investigation. WorkSafe New Zealand has opened a health and safety investigation into the harm and loss of life caused by the eruption.
And that was Deputy Police Commissioner John Timms. Of the 5 people who are confirmed dead, up to 3 may be Australians. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison broke the news to his country early this morning.
Yesterday there were 24 Australians enjoying a wonderful cruise in New Zealand, taking in those sights together, enjoying life, a peaceful time. They were aged between 17 and 72. And they took the option of a tour to White Island, which many Australians have done in the past, and indeed I have on an occasion many years ago. The eruption that took place on that day, we know, based on the reports that we've received from the Prime Minister, we can confirm has taken at least 5 lives. Of the 24 Australians, we've been able to ascertain overnight and this morning that 13 of those Australians are hospitalised across multiple hospitals in New Zealand. There are 11 Australians that are still unaccounted for, and that we fear of the 5 deceased persons, that 3 of those, up to 3, are Australians.
It is almost 16 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you hear on the program this evening, so do get in touch. You can text us 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. A Hamilton man who gave first aid to some of those critically injured says he poured cold water over their severely burned bodies and kept talking to them to stop them falling unconscious as the tour boat made a desperate return to shore. Jeff Hopkins says steam, or a combination of steam and sulphuric acid, look to have caused horrific burns to many of the victims. I asked him where he was at the time of the eruption.
We had finished our tour of the island, had returned to our boat, and were just having a little tour around some of the bays just a few hundred metres offshore when it erupted.
And when did you realise what was going on?
Not instantly. It was very quiet, but there was definitely an attention-grabbing moment from everybody on the boat that caught our attention. We turned around, and then we could see the eruption.
What could you see exactly?
So to start with, it was just a big, beautiful cloud that was rising, that was white and grey, and for a second it kind of just grabbed your attention, and then seconds after, this menacing rolling cloud of ash kind of just rolled over the cliff and sort of headed out and down to sea, at which point we were all ushered inside the cabin of the boat, and the boat took off pretty quick.
Did you realise that there were other people still there? Could you see them?
Couldn't see them at that point. You couldn't see as we got inside the boat and went back round the other side, you couldn't see the island at all. The island was just completely covered in falling ash.
So did your boat return to pick some of the people up?
Yeah, so we went back to where we had left, to where the other boat had been anchored, launched the inflatable, and the crew, at that stage the ash had cleared, and we could see clearly on the island there were some people in the water, and there were people down on the island, and the inflatable started picking people up and bringing them back to our boat.
And when those people came onto your boat, what could you see? What kind of injuries? How were they?
Couldn't see anything initially. We were still in the cabin, but then there was a call for doctors. We indicated we were first aiders. By the time maybe 2 or 3 people are on the boat, we went out to help, and pretty much everybody that was coming on were just with significant burns.
To all parts of their body, Jeff?
Mainly exposed skin, so people with T-shirts and shorts were arms and legs and faces. Exposed skin was probably the worst, but the more critical were burned through their clothing.
So I have seen a picture of a person who seems also to be covered in ash. Was that the case with some of the people you saw?
That there was a lot of ash. I didn't see, there may be 1 or 2 that were quite grey over most of their body, but a lot of people had maybe on their face or, there wasn't, there was a lot of ash about. And in fact, today I can still smell the ash on my hands. I can't get it off, the smell that must be sort of stuck into everything. But yeah, there was a lot of that. I mean, the other boat that was moored looked like it had been spray-painted grey. It was just perfectly covered, every part of it, in ash.
So what did you and the others on board try and do to help these people? What were you able to do?
So we just started to treat burns. So we were just we had a lot of fresh water on board, so we were able to use fresh water. We just called out for any containers that we could use, and we got people to start filling them up, just starting to pour cool fresh water over people's burns. More critical ones, we needed to remove clothing and wrap them up, and reassure people. And then as time went on, shock starts to set in, and so then it's about trying to keep people warm and really reassure them.
I understand paramedics joined your boat at some point. Is that correct?
Yeah. So then we left at some point after the. I was just busy treating people, so I'm not sure what the trigger was for us leaving. But we started heading back. About halfway back, we met a Coast Guard boat, put 2 paramedics on board, and they were able to assist. But not a lot you can really do. A bit of pain relief and just assessing people. Yeah.
And were they able to administer pain relief?
The 2 people that I were with, we couldn't get a vein to get anything into them intravenously. So no.
And Jeff, who were you with in terms of the people you were trying to help? Who were they?
So the couple, the American couple that have been on the news with their honeymoon, that was the 2 people that I was with.
That must have been shocking for you. Have you dealt with anything like this before?
No, nothing. Yeah, nothing like this at all.
And so their injuries, what were they like?
Critical burns, yeah. Critical burns, yeah. I mean, they were in and out of consciousness, so just really just trying to keep them alive until we could get them to shore.
And what were you doing for them? Pouring water on their bodies?
No, that's at that stage trying to keep them warm and keep them conscious. So just a lot of talking to them, a lot of reassuring, and just trying to keep them warm.
And were they able to respond to you, Jeff, when you spoke to them?
On and off, yeah.
Were there any children who were brought onto your boat?
No children on our boat.
Were you able to get a sense of where these people were when the eruption happened?
When we went on for our tour, we were split into 2 groups, and I think that's probably the norm. It's my impression that tour group that was still on the island was in 2 groups, and the people that we rescued were in the first group that had already been to the crater and were making their way back. So that's my impression, that these people were already on their way back towards the beach area, and they're the ones that we rescued. The ones that were unable to rescue, I believe, were probably closer to the crater at the time than in the second group.
Obviously, there were extensive burn injuries, but did you notice any others, traumatic injuries from rockfall or anything like that?
No, my daughter treated someone with a head injury, but we believe that was from a fall. There was nothing to suggest anybody had been hit by anything.
That must have felt like the longest boat ride you've ever been on in your life.
It actually felt like the quickest one, I think, because we focused on what we were doing, and when you're focusing on what you're doing, at the time it just felt like it was hurry up, but when you're focused on just trying to keep someone, it feels like someone's life is dependent on you, then you are focused. We suffer from a little bit of seasickness, but there was no seasickness on the way back. We didn't even really notice what the sea was doing. But it is a long journey back, definitely.
When you left the island, could you see any others still there?
The tour boat from that second group that were on the island was still there. We left behind our inflatable with definitely, I think one of our crew, maybe others, maybe two of our crew stayed behind, and they came back on the second tour boat. Something like maybe half. I think they came back into Whakatane about half an hour after us, something like that. I was in front of the boat, so I couldn't see. I didn't see when we left, but. Yeah.
So, Jeff, is it your impression that some of the crew members stayed back with one of those small boats to try and ferry others, if there were others, off the island?
Yeah, definitely. The small boats stayed behind with the one that was covered in ash. Yeah.
When the explosion happened, can you just tell me about what you could smell, and was the air any denser, or what was it like?
We were on the boat and very quickly ushered inside, so nothing to smell, and no issue at all with us breathing. We kept out of the ash. The ash, as it engulfed the island, and it did completely engulf the island, dark while we were in the shadow of that ash cloud. But there was nothing. And then when we were ferrying people onto the boat, the ash had fallen by then. We weren't in the direction of anything that was still steaming from the crater. So there was, it was quite safe for us as far as gas or anything falling.
Jeff, did you get the impression that the burns that people suffered were from steam or from hot ash sticking to people?
I originally thought it was hot ash, but I'm not sure what it was that caused the burn, but potentially steam, or I'm not even sure if there's an acid element to it. I don't know. People were burned underneath their clothing, and their clothing looked fine. You'd lift someone's shirt, and the shirt was in perfect condition, but there would be terrible burns underneath it. Potentially, yes, steam. I'd not thought it was steam.
What happened when you got to shore?
As soon as we got to shore, very quickly we were met with a lot of ambulances, policemen, firefighters, and as soon as we were at shore, very quick assessment of who was critical. We'd already kind of made that decision ourselves on the boat with the paramedics that we had with them, who we had critical, and we'd already had a plan of who was going to come off first. So that happened quite quickly. We were able to just put bands on people. Their names were recorded. They were put onto boards and lifted off and straight into ambulances.
Thank you so much for talking to us. I really appreciate your time and your service for helping those people. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that was Jeff Hopkins, a Hamilton man who gave first aid to some of those people critically injured in yesterday's eruption. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, police have announced they will carry out a criminal investigation into the deaths of at least 5 people from the Whakaari White Island eruption. It comes as an emergency doctor describes Whakatane's hospital emergency department yesterday as a war zone, and an intensive care paramedic likens the aftermath on the island to a scene from Chernobyl, and why an Australian professor of earth sciences believes tourists should never return. We would love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the programme so far this evening. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to the headlines.
A criminal investigation is underway into the circumstances of the deadly eruption on Whakaari White Island, which killed 13 people. The National Police Operations Commander, Deputy Commissioner John Timms, has told a news conference that in the last hour, everyone who could be taken from the island yesterday was rescued. There's still no word on exactly when the police will send teams in to recover bodies of the 8 people still on the island. Civil Defence Emergency Management Director says there is a 50% chance of eruption in the next 24 hours. GNS says the chances of a large eruption are low, but the volcanic alert level remains at 3. The Prime Minister has sent a message to the families and friends of those overseas tourists caught up in the eruption that New Zealand will hold their loved one close. Jacinda Ardern told Parliament among those injured or missing are people from Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, China, Germany, Malaysia and New Zealand. The Ministry of Health says the country's 4 specialist burns units are at capacity following the eruption on Whakaari White Island. Of the 31 injured, 25 are now in burns units at Middlemore, Waikato, Hutt Valley and Christchurch hospitals. 6 others are in Auckland City and Tauranga hospitals waiting to be transferred to burns units when the space becomes available. Ministry spokesperson Pete Watson says the injuries are severe. A world-renowned professor of geosciences at Australia's Monash University says Whakaari White Island has always been too dangerous for daily tour groups to visit. Emeritus Professor Ray Cass says the first time he visited the island, he couldn't believe tour groups were allowed there. He says given that there are no emergency services on the island and the means of reaching and leaving the island are limited, there's no way to escape. And the Whakatane District Mayor is still backing tours to the island despite the number of confirmed deaths from the eruption. Judy Turner welcomes the criminal investigation but says she personally has been a visitor with White Island tours and she has always been impressed by the health and safety. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, the Chief Executive of Tower Insurance, has resigned. Well, this is the second surprise resignation in many days, isn't it?
Well, he had an opportunity to renew his contract and just decided not to. So it runs out at the end of next year. So he's given a whole year's notice. He's saying, I'm done with this job. I'll be leaving in a year. So that's his notice. It must have been a fairly thankless role, his job. His family's in Australia. Apparently he's returning there to be with them. But also the company's gone through an enormous amount of change. It's moving to a digital platform, so away from the traditional way we think about insurance to something like, online service. And, that's a big transformation. Probably a fresh face would be a good thing. Not only that, the company's been through an awful lot with trying to find resolution to some of the claims associated with the Canterbury earthquakes. That is looking like that's about to head to, the courts. Legal action is sort of probably pending there because they can't settle with the Earthquake Commission. And so I guess it's time for him to say, thank you very much, I'm off. And that's, the second one to go.
Okay, well, on a more positive note, perhaps the economy appears to be speeding up. What's the reason?
There's a bit of momentum in the economy that we haven't seen for a while, and it's an indicator that tracks what's happening on the roads. So heavy freight's still a bit sluggish, but light traffic, which is an indicator of how many people are traveling, has picked up to a point where maybe there is some momentum in the economy, which is probably one of the most positive signs that we've seen for a while. It's been fairly negative. So anything that's a bit positive is always a good thing for the economy, right?
Okay, well, was there any positive news from the markets today?
Yeah, there was. Although the China trade talks with the United States definitely is overhanging the market, and they would like to see some resolution before the tariffs that the United States is imposing come into effect on the 15th. Also, there's the UK election coming up this week. And so anyways, amid all that, we rose nearly 0.5%, 55 points up to close at 11,284 points. And A2 Milk's share price recovered today. And on top of that, the New Zealand dollar is steady at 65.6 US cents, 96.1 Australian, and 49.9 I almost said 50.
You faked us there, Nona.
49.9 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Beltier with all our business numbers and news. Like a war zone is how one doctor has described the emergency department at Whakatane Hospital as it was deluged with badly burned sightseers caught in the ash and steam clouds as White Island erupted. Dr. John Bonning is the president of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine, and he was also called back into Waikato Hospital to help treat seriously injured people who transferred to his hospital and other hospitals around the country. Dr. Bonning says many of those patients had suffered lung injuries from inhaling ash as well as significant burns.
Burns are really challenging because you can get people that look badly burnt, but might even be talking to you initially. But then you know that it's just going to be such a hard road for them in the coming weeks and months because they're really quite significant injuries to your outside of your skin, and anything more than 20% is in some ways anything more than 10% is really quite significant, particularly at the full thickness. But then there's the internal injuries, in particular inhalational injury, where you've breathed in the whatever hot air or substance or ash or chemicals, and it's caused injury to your windpipe and lungs. And of course that's going to make the lung injury very, very difficult, and what a critical organ your lungs are in terms of breathing. So they represent challenges.
What about the volume of patients? And obviously you would have been in contact with your colleagues at Whakatane Hospital, a regional hospital. What kind of volume of people were they seeing, and what kind of pressure?
Indeed. Well, Whakatane is a small regional hospital with fairly limited staffing. It's one of the smallest emergency departments in the country, and they've had a few major incidents in their time, bus crashes and the like, but this threatened to overwhelm them. I think they got nearly 30 patients in varying degrees of criticality from helicopters. Apparently it was a bit like a war zone with helicopters buzzing around in the air. People had gone out to pick up the injured, but they rallied staff, had some staff, I believe, came from Tauranga, and coped remarkably well. And it was explicitly said by my colleagues here in Waikato how good a job this fairly small regional hospital had done resuscitating, intubating, putting on ventilators, and having them sent for the definitive care at a variety of hospitals around the country.
So you mentioned about 30 patients there. Can you put that in perspective for me? I mean, would there be any other critical incidents where you would expect to get that volume of patients so seriously injured? Have you seen anything like that in your career?
Well, I draw comparisons, obviously, with the Christchurch terror attack in terms of sheer volume and immediacy of them. There are similarities and differences, of course, and the inflicted nature of the terror attack made that particularly horrifying. There was a little bit more spread of patients given that they were coming from such a distance. Myself, we had the Tamahiri gas explosion, I forget the year, I think 2008, 2009 or so, where we had 8 people.
That's the Coolpack explosion, do you mean?
That's correct, yes. Yeah. Yes, I was involved with that. So that's the closest I've come. But this was really significant. And then obviously the patients were stabilised. A lot of them in Whakatane. A lot of them did fly directly to various other places. We got some patients directly by helicopter as well, but then they've been spread around the country to look after their fairly significant injuries.
Do we have, the expertise and capacity to cope with this? As you've mentioned, I mean, obviously some went to Waikato, some went to Middlemore and others to the Wellington area. In terms of them being burns injuries and the intensity of treatment that requires, do we have the capacity?
Well, we do. We have some very, very skilled plastic surgeons around the country. Christchurch, I think, have taken some as well. They are very, very busy, the surgeons, and we've spread. I couldn't tell you the totality of the injured people, and it's stretching resources. But certainly, in terms of their initial resuscitation and management, we have coped, I believe, as a country, pretty well. There'll always be, things that you look back and think could have been done better. But in the ongoing treatment, skin grafting and what have you, we use cultured skin to help cover these patients with full thickness burns, and that resource may well be stretched to its limit and beyond.
Explain that to me in a little more detail.
So the skin can be grown in a laboratory that assists with skin grafting. Obviously, it's usually better to use person's own skin, but nowadays you can use skin that has been cultured from cells in a laboratory to use as a temporary or more permanent. And there's a certain amount around in the country. You'd need to speak to one of the plastic surgeons to get a more accurate picture of that. But speaking in generalities, that's the sort of thing that resource that might be significantly stretched.
And can that be sourced from overseas?
Yes, potentially. Once again, it's not really an area of my expertise. Mine is really in the initial resuscitation, which has proceeded very well. All departments. Monday is the busiest day of the week in emergency departments internationally, but in New Zealand, we were all very, very busy, and the whole teams pulled together. The physicians, paediatricians, psychiatrists, etc., all came down to help manage patients that weren't involved with this traumatic event, but we had emergency physicians, anaesthetists, general surgeons, plastic surgeons, etc., that all gathered together in a team. We train for this. This is something that we hope never occurs, but we do simulation sessions, and so right around the country, these mass casualty events would have been called. There are incident controls and what have you, and it's something that we are very much prepared for occurring. So there was no real surprises. It was a chance, somewhat sort of traumatic and difficult to put ourselves through our paces, and I believe that we've come through well.
And that's Dr. John Bonning, who is the president of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine. And an intensive care paramedic says White Island looked like a scene from Chernobyl in the immediate aftermath of the explosion. A veteran of more than 20 years, Rusty Clark was on board one of 2 Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust choppers sent to help and flew over the island shortly after the explosion, scouting for survivors who needed to be airlifted.
Initially, there were reports that there was a critical patient on a boat that required to be winched off. In the end, the boat was deemed quite close to the mainland, so we elected not to winch. Once we got over White Island, you could see for quite a few miles a large plume coming from the island, and it was obviously quite an interesting experience. I mean, this is personally for me, this is the first time I've experienced something like this. And obviously, when you combine that with the sheer magnitude of the initial report that there were multiple people on the island at the time, it becomes pretty obviously overwhelming emotionally pretty quickly. And when you combine the potential for injury and loss of life and the sheer magnitude of it, it's quite an ordeal.
How did you feel flying over there, looking down at what you could see?
It was quite. Obviously, we're very experienced as a crew. We're there to do a job, so you do put your emotions to one side. But at the end of the day, we're all family. We've all got children, and you can't help but feel straight away some empathy for those that are involved and just the sheer magnitude of it. But yeah, obviously we've got a job to do, and we try to do it to our best of our ability.
What did the terrain look like after the eruption?
So when we got over there, looking down on it, I would, in my own personal, I would have to describe it as Chernobyl. Looking at seeing the miniseries, looking at it, it was just a complete, absolute whiteout of the area involved. It was quite a very sort of daunting experience, just seeing seen that initial landscape. There was obviously a helicopter that we could see that got caught up in it, it was quite an overwhelming experience, just for the sheer size of it.
Could you see people?
No, so I couldn't see anybody. There was just a couple of people on the edges of the beach there. There was obviously a few boats that were starting to arrive in the bay there. I didn't see any people myself. No.
So you headed back into Whakatane, and were you involved in treating people who were coming off the boats?
Once it was deemed at the time that they were satisfied initially that we got all the people off that we could, then we basically went back to Whakatane, and then we liaised with the incident controller, and then that comes the next phase, which is a big part in itself, is treating and transporting the number of casualties that there was, and there was a few critical patients, to the respective tertiary hospitals that was obviously deemed appropriate at the time.
What can you tell us about the kind of injuries that you saw?
So I can't go into too much specific detail because there needs to be a formal release from the police regarding that. But the injuries, we transported one particular patient that had critical injuries to Middlemore, and I also saw 2 or 3 other people with life-threatening injuries as well.
Are you talking burns mainly, Rusty?
There was. I can't elaborate on the extent, but there certainly were some burns involved. Yes.
Have you treated burns victims in the past?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is it the same kinds of injuries that you might see from people who have been victims in fires, or is it different?
So initially, when we go to any sort of, whether it be eruption, and obviously eruptions they certainly don't happen every day. So things like we would expect to see or look for things like blast injuries, inhalation injuries, burns, traumatic injuries. So there's a whole raft of things that we prepare for,
What do you mean in terms of inhalation injuries? Because I was speaking to a volcanologist who told me that potentially the temperature of the material coming out of the volcano could be 120 to 150 degrees.
Sure. So any environment where there is external factors, like whether it be as you can probably elaborate with the volcanologist, any sort of exceeding temperatures like breathing in dust particles, we could expect to find burns of the airways and the mouth, the lungs, and anything like that.
And that was Rusty Clark, an intensive care paramedic of some 20 plus years. It is about 12 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program so far this evening. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. An Australian professor of geosciences believes tourists should not have been on Whakaari White Island because the volcano is too volatile. 5 people are confirmed dead after the eruption at 2:11 yesterday. 8 people are still missing on the island and are presumed dead. The police this afternoon confirmed a criminal investigation has been launched. Emeritus Professor Ray Cass from Monash University's School of Earth, Atmosphere and Environment in Australia has visited White Island twice before. Professor Cass told me the island is simply too remote and unpredictable to be a tourist attraction.
You're ferried to the island in a rubber ducky with 6 to 10 other people. Now, that, of course, is then the only means off the island as well, which becomes a problem when you need to evacuate large numbers of people in a hurry, as occurred yesterday. It was not possible to get everyone off the island very quickly there. So the fact that the island is uninhabited, it has no emergency services on the island, is very remote, is therefore the first major concern. Then you actually get onto the island and you walk into this very large enclosed amphitheatre-like crater. and it's spectacular. I can understand the fascination of wanting to go there, because when you then start walking into the crater floor, you're confronted with multiple vents emitting gas. They're encrusted with sulfur. They're spectacular to see, but those gases are actually noxious. And there is a possibility that they could pond in that amphitheatre-like crater and actually cause asphyxiation at various times. In addition, there are, depending on the state of the volcano, there are one or more crater lakes that are filled with hot, steaming water. Now, those lakes have at times overflowed, so sudden overspills of extremely hot water, perhaps at boiling point, producing extremely hot mud flows. That, of course, is a huge hazard with the potential for causing extremely bad burns. And then that's the hazard associated with the crater lakes. But in addition, the banks of the craters are unstable, so that whenever you go there, there are concentric lines of cracks close to the edge of those crater lakes, where basically the banks are ready to collapse into the crater. And that's where a lot of people stand to try and, understandably, try and get the best shots.
So in your view, Professor, sorry to interrupt, but in your view, simply put, do you think those people should not have been on the island at all yesterday?
No, I don't, because the alert level had been raised to 2 in the last few weeks. Now, 2 in itself on a scale of 5 alert levels is usually not enough to indicate that there's a likelihood of a significant eruption. It's usually once you get to 3 and 4 that you need to really worry. But the fact that it had been raised indicates that things were happening inside the volcano. Hot magma or molten rock heats the groundwater. The groundwater consists of water vapours released by the magma, as well as seawater that is percolating into the volcanic edifice from the oceans. And that generates a constantly hot geothermal system that feeds those crater lakes. But the problem is that it's not only the water in those lakes that's a hazard, because under the volcano, in the cracks and fractures through which the water is circulating, those cracks and fractures begin to clog up as minerals precipitate in them, pressure builds up, and then, of course, the system needs to release that pressure with a significant explosion. And that's the biggest hazard with White Island, that you can get these unexpected significant explosions, even when the alert levels are relatively low. And you know, people would say, well, okay, you can go there, but you need to be very wary of possible dangers. Well, as we saw yesterday, disasters can happen even when the alert levels are low, and that's a big problem where explosions are largely driven by hydrothermal explosions.
I am not making light of the situation when I ask this question, but the reality is that there is risk associated with many things we do in life, and particularly with adventure tourism. So, against that backdrop, this deaths occurring on this island, well, the last major incident was in 1914, was it?
That was the last time that there was a major loss of life, largely through a landslide and I think there was an accompanying small explosive event.
The point being that the risk is relatively low, isn't it?
But look, this is always the case when you go to a volcanic environment. You particularly where there are active geothermal systems, you know that there is an element of risk. But when there are so many hazards in such a small confined crater, and you're actually in the crater of a major volcano, that is not a good place to have a lot of people. There are many other places in New Zealand where people can go to experience volcano tourism, where in fact the risk levels are lower and more clearly understood. Rotorua, the summit areas of Tongariro, Ruapehu and Ngarahoe are generally safe, although not completely without risk, has been shown by unexpected explosions on the Tongariro Plateau not so many years ago. But those areas, there is less likelihood of sudden unexpected explosions and other closely associated hazards, as we find in that large crater in White Island.
Should tourists return to this island?
Well, I wouldn't recommend it.
Ever? Because of the unpredictability?
Yeah, exactly, because even though the volcanoes had released pressure this time, there is no reason to expect that, therefore, we're not going to get one for many other years. And the problem then is, even if you accept that philosophy, there is going to be a next time, because the volcano will go off unexpectedly, particularly in the daytime. There will be people in the crater. There have been other eruptions in the last 2 decades which have occurred, explosive eruptions which have occurred at night. If they had occurred during the day, there would again have been at least injuries and probably some fatalities. So it's Russian roulette if you take people there, and who's responsible for that?
Do you know the answer to that question? Who do you think is responsible?
This has to be a community decision made in New Zealand. It's not for me, as an outsider, to try and propose what should be done. New Zealand has a very well-qualified volcanologist. It has a very active tourism industry, but obviously everything needs to be conducted with the appropriate level of responsibility and care for the tourists who are undertaking these activities.
Would you go back there?
No.
And that's Professor Ray Cass from Monash University. Now, most of the people who were on Whakaari White Island yesterday were passengers on board a cruise ship, the Ovation of the Seas, which had berthed in Tauranga. They took a day trip out to the island but never returned. That boat is still waiting at the port of Tauranga with no word on when it will be able to leave. Among the 5,000 or so people on board is ABC journalist Donna Field, and she joins me now. Good evening, Donna. What has been happening on board the ship today?
Hello, Lisa. Yeah, look, it's been a really strange day. I've actually hopped off the boat for part of it, reporting for the ABC, but during the times that I've been on board, I'd have to say it's pretty subdued. People are all talking about the tragedy on White Island, and you know, they've all been contacted by their loved ones, checking in on them. So subdued and sombre is the mood. I mean, it is still, you know, business as usual in part, in terms of people having their holiday and hopping in the swimming pool and the kids doing what kids do on cruise ships. But I think people are really reeling from the fact that families have left this ship and are not coming back.
What is the cruise company or the captain told the guests?
So there's been a few full ship announcements over the PA system by the captain, who I must say sounded quite shaken himself. Initially, he spoke of crew and passengers being on the island when the volcano erupted. Subsequently, he's talked about giving his condolences to the families of those who've been affected by this tragedy, and he's offered counselling to all on board. He's asked for people's support and patience and understanding during this very difficult time. He's called it a terrible tragedy. Heartbreaking was the word he used this morning when he addressed the passengers. We haven't heard anything in terms of what the plans are for this ship. I mean, there's still, as you say, thousands of people on board who had, you know, the rest of their adventure in New Zealand planned. We were due to be in Wellington tomorrow morning and then in Dunedin later in the week. So it's all up in the air about what's going to happen there. As I sit on my balcony this afternoon, I can see a police car and several authorities gathered in a bit of a huddle. They're all wearing uniforms. I don't know if there's some kind of investigation that will take place with interviews with people on the ship. I'm speculating, but there's certainly activity around the boat this evening.
Have they told you, our understanding is that the boat's departure has been delayed due to police operational matters. Have they expanded on that?
No, we haven't been told as passengers any of that. I have some of that information from watching the TV and doing my work as a journalist, but the passengers haven't been informed of any of that. In fact, I've had people seeking me out today to ask, what's going on? What do you know? They wanted firm information, and it's been fairly brief, the statements that we've had. I'm sure lots of people are going to guest services, but I know that when you do approach a cruise attendant, they say that you just have to await official information from the captain and the bridge.
And have you been offered any extra assistance?
No, just the counselling at this stage. And look, I've talked to a lot of people today, and I haven't heard one person say to me, oh, no, my holiday plans are ruined. People are just very saddened that someone else's holiday, the trip of a lifetime. This is what these cruises are for families. They are the holiday that has it all, You get to come to a beautiful place like New Zealand. You get to experience all kinds of adventures, or maybe just a stroll around the port city. You get to spend time with your family. You don't have to cook or clean for 12 days. It's pretty fabulous, and there's lots of activities to do on board. And
Donna Field from the ABC.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The police are launching a criminal investigation into the eruption on Whakaari White Island, which killed 13 people. 8 people are missing, presumed dead, while another 5, taken off the island after the eruption yesterday, have also died. National Deputy Commissioner John Timms says everyone who could be taken from the island yesterday was rescued. Mr Timms says the investigation is one of 2 that is being launched.
We will commence a criminal investigation into the circumstances of the death and injuries on White Island. The terms of reference will be developed over the next few days. This will be carried out in parallel with the WorkSafe New Zealand investigation. WorkSafe New Zealand has opened a health and safety investigation into the harm and loss of life caused by the eruption.
Police have tried to fly a drone over White Island today, but have been unable to because of the wind. John Timms says they've made one unsuccessful attempt to launch a drone off a boat near the island, but will keep trying. He says he understands the desire of friends and family to have the bodies back, but they have to be mindful of the risks.
We are taking advice from the best scientific experts, including GNS Science, who are considering 3 aspects of the recovery operation. Firstly, the condition of the island. Secondly, the requirements for those going onto the island, what they will need. And thirdly, the care and transportation of the deceased when they are recovered.
The Whakatane District Mayor is still backing tours to Whakaari White Island. Judy Turner welcomes the criminal investigation, saying it is a natural process after yesterday's events, but she says she wants the tours to continue.
Personally, I've been out with them and was very impressed with the briefings that we were given and the attention to health and safety protocols that were done at the time. And I happen to know that's their norm. So I'm very confident that they have been a safe practitioner.
The Whakatane District Mayor, Judy Turner. The Ministry of Health says the country's 4 specialist burns units are at capacity following the eruption at Whakaari White Island. Of the 31 injured, 25 are now in burns units at Middlemore, Waikato, Hutt Valley and Christchurch hospitals. 6 others are in Auckland City and Tauranga hospitals, waiting to be transferred to a burns unit when space becomes available. Ministry spokesperson Pete Watson says the injuries are severe.
Of those injured, 27 of the 31 have suffered greater than 30% total body surface area burns, the standard criteria for admission to our National Burns Unit at Middlemore.
Pete Watson says seriously injured Australians could be transferred to hospitals with burns units back home as soon as they are well enough. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has sent a team to Whakatane to help provide consular assistance for families of those killed in the eruption. The police say the 47 people on the island at the time of the eruption came from the United Kingdom, Germany, China, Australia, Malaysia, New Zealand and the United States. Civil Defence Emergency Management Director Sarah Stewart-Black says they are trying to ensure those affected receive the support they need. She says Foreign Affairs has sent a team of 3 people to Whakatane to support diplomatic missions of affected foreign nationals.
Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade also connects diplomatic missions with New Zealand agencies which can assist in supporting family members who are travelling to New Zealand. And they will coordinate any offers of and requests for international assistance to New Zealand.
In a sign of solidarity, the National Party has thanked the government for its handling of the White Island eruption. In a speech, National's Deputy Leader Paula Bennett told the House this country's land has opened up and taken lives with it.
For those that are not from New Zealand, understanding that our land has taken them, our land now looks after them, and will always show that kind of respect. So on behalf of the opposition, we would like to recognise those that are suffering. We'd like to recognise those that are working so closely behind it and thank the government for the work that they're doing at the moment.
More properties in South Canterbury have been evacuated today, bringing the total to 115, as floodwater levels have been slow to drop. Heavy rain battered the region over the weekend, causing the Rangitata River to breach its banks and flood nearby properties. Timaru Emergency Operations Centre Manager Stephen Duran says the changes in the river flows put another 40 properties at risk of being swamped.
After a flood, you can see the sort of continued scouring out of the base and the water entering other areas, so that can lead to new flow patterns. What that in effect means is that there's some flooding in areas of the South Branch now that we didn't see in prior days as the water's moving into different areas.
Stephen Duran says a civil defence centre has been set up in Temuka for those forced to leave their homes. A man is in custody after a vehicle chase. An officer narrowly avoided hitting members of the public in West Auckland this afternoon. The police say they had been in New Lynn checking reports of suspicious activity when a car arrived at the address and was suddenly driven off. The driver was signalled to stop near the northwestern motorway just before 3 o'clock but didn't. The pursuit was abandoned immediately with the police Eagle helicopter monitoring from the air. The police say the car was being driven erratically and spikes were deployed several times. The car was abandoned in the Clendon Park area and a man on foot tracked to a nearby street where he was arrested. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 6. The Black Caps fast bowler Trent Boult remains in doubt for Thursday's first cricket test against Australia in Perth as he battles to overcome a side strain. New Zealand has had their first training in the Western Australian heat and Boult completed light warm-up duties, but he did not bowl. Fellow seamer Tim Southee is hoping Boult will play, but says they won't risk him if he's not ready.
If he gets through the next few days, then I don't see why he wouldn't play. He's an experienced guy and he knows his body very well. So yeah, if he's good to go, then he'll be good to go. But that'll be assessed over the next couple of days.
Tim Southee. All-rounder Colin de Grandhomme is in a similar position and will also need to pass a fitness test. Former All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says he's questioned his approach leading up to the semi-final against England. Hansen has told All Blacks TV he's reflected a lot on the build-up to that game. He says after their big win over Ireland in the quarterfinals, their desperation levels may have dropped off.
You know, I looked at myself and maybe my messages during the week weren't on the money the way they could have been from a mental point of view, knowing that we've just come off a big win against Ireland and knowing what we were going into.
Steve Hansen. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow has grounds to appeal a decision by WADA to ban Russia from major sporting events, a move he says violates the Olympic Charter. Russia has been banned from the world's top sporting events for 4 years for tampering with doping tests. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the word of Galileo and the sometimes stormy relationship between science and religion, while our astronomer Alan Gilmore has the latest news from outer space, including more angst over satellite traffic congestion and a Neptune-sized exoplanet orbiting a white dwarf, which has cosmologists stumped as to how it got there. I just think it's amazing we know it's there in the first place. On Nights, with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mostly fine, but isolated showers until tonight, mainly in Northland. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine breaks, cloud increasing tomorrow morning, occasional rain developing in Gisborne, becoming more persistent and spreading south. For the remainder of the North Island, also Nelson and Marlborough, fine, chance of a shower about the Marlborough Ranges tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland, Canterbury and North Otago, fine and cloudy periods, isolated showers in West Westland today. A few showers tomorrow afternoon and evening, mainly inland south of Tekapo, where some may be heavy. For the remainder of Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional showers turning to rain about Fiordland and Stewart Island this evening. Elsewhere, showers more frequent and possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon and evening. Chatham Islands, fine, rain developing by tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, police have launched a criminal investigation into the aftermath of the Whakaari White Island eruption. There were 47 people on the island when it erupted just after 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, being hosted by White Island Tours. 5 people have been confirmed dead, another 8 are still on the island. Those people are presumed dead, but their bodies have yet to be recovered because conditions on Whakaari White Island aren't deemed to be safe enough for people to head back yet. Along with yesterday's deaths, there are dozens of injuries. 31 people were rushed to hospital, many of whom suffered significant burns. Those injured are aged between 13 and 72 years, and 27 of them have burns to more than 30% of their body. Burns units around the country are now at capacity. In the past hour, police have announced they will be investigating the deaths and injuries from yesterday's eruption, and WorkSafe will also be investigating as the regulator of the Adventure Activities regulations. The Whakatane District Mayor, Judy Turner, is still backing tours to the island. She says she personally has been a visitor with White Island Tours and has always been impressed by the health and safety. Many of those on the island yesterday were tourists from a visiting cruise ship and had been on a day trip to the island. Royal Caribbean says the ship will now remain in port due to the police investigation. And while attention will now be shifting to that investigation, many are still recalling the heroic acts that meant more lives weren't lost yesterday. First responders have described horrific scenes and controlled chaos as they helped those injured out of boats. Our reporter Jessie Chang and visual journalist Dom Thomas are in Whakatane.
The last time people died on Whakaari White Island was more than a century ago in 1914 when 10 sulphur miners were killed. Today, the community of Whakatane was in shock as the reality of yesterday's tragedy set in. Firefighter Chris Hands, along with 4 other family members, were all at the Whakatane boat ramp within 40 minutes of the first eruption.
Something off a movie, you know. Sort of a bit surreal, you know. But you just got and did the job, so you didn't really know. You just didn't think about it at the time because you had a job to do.
Chris Hands says they were called to help move the injured off the boat, but he says nothing could have prepared them for what they saw.
We've had people with worse injuries in house fires, but just the multiple of people coming in, it was, you know, we only had sort of 1 or 2 occasionally where this is, you know, 20 odd, and just people everywhere here, so it's pretty horrific.
47 people were on the island when the volcano spewed toxic gas and ash 12,000 feet into the air, raining down on sightseers from Australia, America, Britain, China, Malaysia and New Zealand. 5 people who were brought from the island yesterday were confirmed dead. Superintendent Bruce Bird was blunt when talking about the chances of survival for those still missing.
The pilot that went out there and spent about 45 minutes has provided a pretty good indication that we do not believe anybody else has survived that explosion. We also had the Eagle helicopter up there as well for a considerable period of time, and we could detect no signs of life.
Whānau and friends gathered at Te Manuka Tutahi Marae this morning for a karakia to mourn those who had died. Ngāti Awa Kaumatua Te Keimerito says everyone is devastated.
Obviously, those who are here have gathered to, to remember, to mourn, and also to seek information about those who are still on the island. So it is a sharing, an occasion for sharing, sharing love especially, and to embrace each other under this cloud of mourning.
White Island Tours had a boat of 38 tourists and 4 staff members on the island during the eruption. 2 of their guides are missing, presumed dead, Hayden Marshall Inman and Tipene Mangi. The The company is owned by local iwi Ngāti Awa, and its chairman Paul Quinn says it's been a tough time.
My focus has been assisting management and supporting staff, but also to work with the emergency response team in terms of understanding where things are at and providing support to them in the best way we can, and also trying to get to the bottom of where our clients are.
The alert for the volcano was at level 2 at the time of the eruption, meaning a moderate to heightened unrest. Mr Quinn says the tour has operated during that level before.
Been on level 2 for about a week, and we have operated previously at level 2.
Many of the 31 injured remain in hospitals across the country, including in Whakatane, Tauranga, Middlemore, the Waikato and Wellington. St John says patients are being treated for blast impact injuries and burns. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern met with some of them today, as well as first responders at the Whakatane fire station.
What a community that exists here in Whakatane, and everyone from Coast Guard, firefighters, St John's, the police, all down on the ground making themselves available to assist. They have done an incredible job under devastating circumstances.
Jacinda Ardern travelled back to Wellington early this afternoon. I Whakatane mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, kōrisi Chang tēnei.
The Police Minister, Stuart Nash, has defended the police decision not to attempt a whakaare rescue last night and says he's confident authorities did everything they could. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The scale of this tragedy is devastating.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern once again fronting the country to speak to unspeakable tragedy.
I say to those who have lost and grieve, you are forever linked to our nation, and we will hold you close.
After a night and day on the ground in Whakatane, the PM has returned to Parliament, but her focus very much still on Whakaari White Island. While away, she spoke to those first on the scene, the helicopter pilots who flew into danger to help the wounded. The choppers and nearby boats helped get 31 people off the island alive.
I have no doubt that they saved lives at great risk to their own personal safety.
But some are now asking whether more could or should have been done. The police opted not to mount a rescue operation in the immediate aftermath and have yet to visit the island. They say they've been advised it's too unsafe, that the volcano may erupt again at any moment. The 8 people still unaccounted for are now believed dead. The brother of one of those victims today criticised the police response, saying he'd had little communication with authorities and it seemed decisions were being made in Wellington rather than in consultation with local experts. He says it reminds him of the Pike River disaster, in which 9 years on, the bodies of the 29 dead have still yet to be recovered.
No, I think it's very unfair.
The Police Minister, Stuart Nash, has defended the emergency services. He says they're doing everything they can to recover the bodies of those still on the island.
An extremely dangerous situation, volatile situation. They had no idea what they were dealing with, and what they're doing is they're waiting for the right scientific and technical information before they can actually even think about going onto the island.
I spoke personally to one of the helicopter operators who was on the island in the immediate aftermath. He confirmed again that tragically everyone who was alive and survived was taken off the island.
A natural hazard expert from the University of Canterbury is also defending the response. Professor Tom Wilson says police were right to stop choppers heading back after the initial rescue.
Often when we have eruptions like this, further eruptions can occur, so systems can be very unstable, and the GNS volcanologists will be looking at what has happened to that volcanic system and what's happening.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges says it's understandable that the families of the victims will have questions about the police response. But those questions, he says, are for another day.
I'm not on the ground. There's always two sides to every story. I mean, it does seem at first blush very reasonable what the police are saying about the issues of going on, the advice that they've had. But I think you'd add that into the list of questions effectively that they will be following this.
Those questions will likely be considered in some form of inquiry, though the details of what exactly that might look like have yet to be decided. Like Mr Bridges, Ms Ardern says today the focus is on the recovery and supporting those who've lost friends and family. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Should they have been there? That's the question many are asking in the wake of the tragic eruption on Whakaari White Island, which has killed at least 5 people. The island's alert level had recently been raised from a level 1 to a 2 out of 5, but that wasn't enough to stop tours heading over and allowing people to walk into the crater. Emma Hatton reports.
White Island, Whakaari, a private scenic reserve, is accessible only if accompanied by a permit-holding tour operator. It's up to the operators whether to take people there, based on advice from science organisation GeoNet, which monitors the island's activity. On November 18, GeoNet upgraded Whakaari's alert to a level 2 after an increase in gas output, a rising crater lake and geyser-type activity at the edge of the lake. A spokesperson for GeoNet said all its volcanologists were too busy to talk in the aftermath of the eruption, but that its experts spoke frequently with the tour operators, advising them on the state of the island. Paul Quinn, chair of Ngāti Holdings, which owns White Island Tours, said the heightened alert levels on the volcano over the last few weeks didn't meet its threshold for stopping operations, and everyone was comfortable continuing to go there.
Level 3 and above, we liaise more directly with GNS. But at level 2, level 2 is still within our operational guidelines.
2.5 years ago, the Bay of Plenty Civil Defence Emergency Management Group took formal responsibility over the emergency response plan for Whakaari. The group took that over from central government because the privately owned island doesn't come under the jurisdiction of any city or council. The former chair of the group, Greg Brownless, says while it had that responsibility, it had no mandate to stop people going to the island or offer any sway on what tour operators could or couldn't do. He's not sure a group like that should have such power, as it could be a slippery slope.
That could lead to us and tourists not being able to go anywhere in a number of different activities or things that have some danger. I mean, we have geothermal all around this place, so I guess it's a question of how far you go.
Addressing reporters this afternoon, the Tourism Minister, Calvin Davis, says whether people should have been on the island is an important question. But today isn't the day to be asking it.
This isn't really the time to be asking those questions when we still have bodies on the island where we need to recover the lost people. And there will be a time to answer these questions, but it's really just not appropriate today when we haven't gone through that whole process.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, agreeing, saying there was no value at this point in unfocused speculation.
All these questions are seriously premature at this point in time. What's our number one focus? It's to see we get all the attention and the care to the victims here and the wider families of those involved. And those aspects will not be covered over, not be hidden. We'll get to the bottom of it at the time when we properly can.
GeoNet's alert level for Whakaari is currently rated 3 out of a possible 5. Whether or not tour operators continue to be in charge of who can visit the island, or indeed if tourism is to continue on the island, is expected to be discussed in due course. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
It's 22 after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. One of the people missing on Whakaari is believed to be a 23-year-old man who had only started working as a tour guide on the island a few months ago. Friends and whānau of Tipene Mangi gathered in Whakatane this afternoon, anxiously awaiting any news on his whereabouts. They told our reporter Katie Scotcher Tipene always put others before himself and is a loving young man.
Tipene Mangi's father cried as he stood at the cordon and stared at Whakaari, a line of police tape and roughly 50 kilometres of ocean keeping him from his son. Tipene is one of 8 people missing on the island, presumed dead after the major eruption yesterday. Flights over the volcano have not found any sign of life, and it is still too dangerous for the police to launch a rescue mission. Despite the messages from emergency services, his father told RNZ he is not giving up hope. His close friend Shania Simmons is also holding out for a miracle, but as time goes on, a miracle is looking less and less likely.
Just knowing that there's a high chance that he's laying out there, it's just gut-wrenching. It makes me feel sick.
Tipene worked for White Island Tours and was hired just a few months ago. Shania says he loved his job and teaching tourists about Māori culture. She says they both applied for the same job.
He suits this job, honestly. And I was mad at him because I applied for it too. And I messaged him, I was like, you were supposed to leave that job for me. And he just reckons, oh, I must have been better than... I was like, oh, that sums you up.
Shania says Tipene is the sort of person who would go out of his way to help others first.
He would have stayed there and tried to help anyone that he could have. He would have put his job and people first before himself.
But now all Shania wishes is that she got the job instead.
In all honesty, all I could think this morning was I would have rather it be me than him out there. But I think he'd be saying something along the lines of, I was on White Island when it blew up. He's that kind of person, like, he'd find it funny.
After hearing about the eruption yesterday afternoon, Shania messaged him last night but never got a response. She heard he was missing at 6 this morning.
I was up, checked my messenger, and my mum had told me that nobody had heard from him yet. Yeah, so I'm just waiting.
After hearing the news, she spent all morning crying.
It was hard, but everyone is just being hopeful, really.
The pair met about 12 years ago and went to high school together. Shania describes Tipene as a loving young man who would always look out for others.
Funny, very funny, and he was one of those ones, like, because him and I did an MC gig down the coast at one of the Stop the Drilling concerts that they have down there. It's a fundraiser, and him and I MC'd together, and he was just hilarious, just captivated the crowd all day, had his dumb jokes, but everybody thought they were hilarious because he's an old soul.
His whānau and members of the community gathered this morning at Te Manuka Tūtahi Marae for a karakia. Ko Mātua TK Marito says it was a chance for families and iwi to show their support.
Oh, quite devastated, as you would appreciate, that there's Ngātiwa staff as well that were affected by the tragedy and the eruption, and we still don't know the results of those who are still on the island on Pui Whakaari.
A karakia has also been held by mana whenua at the cruise ship docked in Tauranga. Some of the people who were on the island at the time of the eruption were passengers on the ship. In Whakatane for Checkpoint, Katie Scotcher.
In other news, hundreds of people have finally managed to leave Franz Josef today after massive slips cut off the tourist hotspot in all directions. Wild weather over the weekend hammered the west coast, causing huge slips, with Franz Josef cut off since Saturday. But progress is slow on the other coast in South Canterbury, where floodwaters are still high since the Rangitata River breached its banks. There were more evacuations in the Timaru district today as the flooded river threatened 40 more properties. Nicholas Poynton reports.
Tourists stranded on the west coast were relieved when the road south out of Franz Josef opened at 2 o'clock this afternoon. 18-year-old Tristan Timmering and his friend, who had escaped rising flood rivers in Whataroa over the weekend, were among them. The German tourist says he was grateful for the hospitality and help they received from strangers.
We've been staying with some local people that have taken us in for the time that we've been stuck here. They've been taking care of us and helping us out. It was a new situation. You had to adapt first and get out of your comfort zone and, talk to these people, get to know them. And, it was nice.
Timmering says their time on the west coast has been an adventure he will never forget, but he now looks forward to pushing on with their South Island road trip.
We had a skydive at Mount Cook on Thursday. So, we're happy to go there and do that. We nearly thought that we couldn't make it, but that's what we're going to do next.
West Coast Civil Defence Manager Kim Hibbs says the road out of Franz Josef will be open to all traffic tomorrow.
From Whataroa right through to Haast from 10 a.m. tomorrow, Wednesday the 11th of December. It will close again at 8 p.m. tomorrow night. Then from Thursday the 12th of December, it will be open daily from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So it's right through from Whataroa to Haast that will be open.
On the other side of the South Island, an evacuation notice is in place for 40 properties in South Canterbury, after new flood patterns have emerged since the Rangitata River breached its banks. Timaru Emergency Operations Centre Manager Stephen Doran says 115 properties in total have been evacuated as water levels have not receded.
After a flood, you can see the sort of continued scouring out of the base and the water entering other areas, so that can lead to new flow patterns. What that in effect means is that there's some flooding in areas of the South Branch now that we didn't see in prior days, as the water's moving into different areas.
He says a civil defence centre has been set up in Temuka for those who have been forced to leave their homes. Jason Grant from Federated Farmers says the flooding has hit farmers particularly hard, with 16 properties affected.
It doesn't seem like a lot, but they are large scale, and it probably takes in about 50-odd families. There's a lot of people work on these properties, so the impact is quite severe. And it is having an impact on the people that are working there. People have been displaced from their homes, been evacuated out. Some homes have been had floodwaters go through them, and they've been quite severely damaged, and they've been yellow stickered, so people can't stay there.
Further south, the Queenstown Lakes District Council is continuing to clear tons of driftwood swept ashore by swollen lakes in Wanaka and Queenstown last week. The council says the levels of Lake Wanaka and Lake Wakatipu have fallen, but further rain is expected to fall later this week. For Checkpoint, Nicholas Poynton.
Now, before we go, we wanted to bring you an update on the measles outbreak in Samoa, which we've obviously covered extensively over the past couple of weeks. In the last 24 hours, there have been no new deaths reported. Now, that break in the rising death toll is significant news. It is the first time that no further deaths have been recorded in a 24-hour period for more than a week, possibly 2 weeks. So hopefully that is some good news. Don't forget, you can look at all our stories online on our web page and on Facebook. The bulletins will keep you up to date through the evening. Morning Report is on tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police are launching a criminal investigation into the eruption of Whakaari White Island, which killed 13 people. Strong winds have prevented the police from flying a drone over the island today to assess the state of the island's atmosphere. The country's 4 specialist burns units are full following the eruption, and the Ministry of Health is looking at sending some Australian burns patients home to be near their families. The cruise ship that most of those affected by the eruption arrived on will stay in the port of Tauranga for a couple more days. And more properties in South Canterbury have been evacuated today, bringing the total to 115 as floodwater levels have been slow to drop. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Locals that I talked to previously as well said that everyone who comes to Whakatane, they go to White Island. It's what the area is known for.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
This is an awful tragedy that is exactly the